So this week's little trio is hard for me because it's a note I'm especially fond of, and it's a note in a lot of my fragrances, and that's violet, which can perform many different ways in fragrances. Often it's paired with rose or iris. It doesn't always have to be, and also it's got these different facets to it. It can be quite floral and thick and petally. It's that very purple familiar smell. It can be powdery and kind of silky and sumptuous, and it can also be quite sweet Parma violet-y, again quite powdery. And I believe it's another one of them. I might have already done a violet video at some point, but I believe it's also kind of what we perceive as that makeup-y kind of thing in makeup is actually violet, and the orris gives the kind of the texture more so than the kind of florally smell we're used to, and obviously that's been adapted to give that kind of fancy iris. Anyway, that's waffling. So yes, what are mine? So yeah, first up we'll go for the indie, and it's a collaboration between 4160 Tuesdays and Tessa Williams, and it's called Dancing with Strangers, I think. Yes, I always forget this name or mix it up. But anyway, it's like it is your classic kind of violet, rose, kind of iris one. Taking you back to them days of, big ball gowns, dancers, evening events, that kind of vintage, what would have been in the air quite a lot. Kind of iconic fragrance, but the difference is with this one is it has honeysuckle in it, which obviously adds its own kind of sweetness and kind of green, not green is it, but it does have an almost green kind of botanical floral sweetness in there with it, and it just makes this into, I think I've spoken about it before, obviously just pushes it into being something different on the iris, rose, violet kind of things. It's a very welcoming fragrance. It dries down to be quite powdery and musky, but again that honeysuckle keeps a bit of something through it, a bit of balance, so it's not too much of one thing or the other. Anyway, keeping it brief as ever, my indie fragrance is Dancing with Strangers from 4160 Tuesdays and Tessa Williams. Niche is a hard one, and I've gone for one that I don't have a full bottle of, though I might get a little mini. I've got loads of, probably, again, well over 10ml of it, and it's not one you kind of go through very quickly. And that's MFK's Maison Francis Kurkdjian's Oud Satin Mood. And if you know this fragrance, it's kind of this very dark. People say it's rosy to me, but I pick up more the violet, maybe because I'm more of a violet smell. But they are kind of intertwined, the rose and the violet. And the rose itself is quite a dark one anyway. And it's almost like a violet dark syrup weaving through it. And obviously it's got a bit of oud accord, oud whatever in there. It's very dark and woody. And that's how it kind of all balances out. But it's like, to me, it's the violet version of Noir de Noir. There probably is patchouli and stuff in it, but it's mainly the woods, I'd say. And yeah, it's quite a gothy fragrance because of that dark sweetness. Obviously purple and red take us to that. Anyway, I'm waffling on. It's a beautiful fragrance. The EDP and the extrait, they are slightly different. I'll talk about them both together more or less. Obviously it's the extrait, it's the one I'm more familiar with and the one I think I own most of the things through, and it the leathery kind of oud is much more prominent through that one to me anyway. Alright, anyway, that's MFK's Oud Satin Mood. And finally is the designer. I could have picked from, again, a good many, but I've gone for Yves Saint Laurent La Nuit de l'Homme Longtemps, the older discontinued one. I know there's a new Longtemps, they all confuse me. Anyway, this is a predominantly violet, and it has the kind of more powdery kind of Parma violet touch through it, with the iris kind of adding to that, and it runs through kind of at the silky kind of base, and that there's tonka in the base and some woods, quite warm. It's very seductive. There's an awful lot of vanilla, which keeps this one much smoother than the original, and I think there's sage, not lavender, in this. But what it does smell like, or a good way to describe it, is it does smell like Le Nuit de l'Homme, but with different notes. That violet, rather than the cardamom and lavender, adds that kind of sweetness running through it. It's not quite as fresh as that, probably because of vanilla and tonka, but it's the same idea. It's the same kind of feeling, and it you know what I mean. It's not as fresh, but it reminds you of it without smelling anything like it at all. It's a really good flanker actually, and one of my favourites. So yeah, for a kind of powdery, violety, irisy version of the original, a darker evening wear one if you like, is Yves Saint Laurent Le Nuit de l'Homme Lentins. So yeah, brief again. So it's a struggle for me to keep them brief and pot through them, but I can do it sometimes, as we can see. Again, when I do these brief videos, there are more detailed stuff either on Instagram from me or other videos where I've probably gone into more depth. What about you? What's your favourite violet fragrance? The violet flower, I never specify that yet, because violet leaf is something different, but what do you enjoy? Do you enjoy a kind of dark floral with a violet, or do you prefer a rose through it? What sort of flowers do you prefer for a kind of date night kind of night? Because obviously the darker ones suit it. Anyway, I'm waffling. So yeah, thanks for watching, folks.